Hey everyone, it's nice to see you back for another episode of the House of Grey. So, Casey got clowned by a girl. An incredibly gorgeous, mysterious girl, but a girl all the same. Not to mention, he's now in a world of hurt, both body and pride. Add the fact that there's no way he'll be able to make the tryout in his current injured condition, and I can empathize with the guy. But it's still pretty funny. What do you think of Cyan? Let us know over at houseofgreybook.com. In this episode, all you football fans are in for quite the ride. Buckle up for episode number 10. Monson's next few days were at the same time some of the best and some of the worst he had had in a long time. He thought at orientation, and again in his apartment that first night, that a certain amount of unpleasantness would arise out of the whole Horm-Veer business. Really, what did he expect? He ousted the Diamond, the single most successful athlete in Corn's history. Of course he should expect some backlash. In his own defense, though, the Diamond was still in school. It turned out he did not really even need the scholarship, so there really should not be any problem. At least, any sensible person would see that fact. However, Monson realized when dealing with his classmates, sense did not seem to be one of their strong points, and he found that they crushed any hope to the contrary. Thankfully, the Diamond was not spearheading the clandestine operation to make Monson's life unbearable. In fact, except for that time during orientation, he had yet to see the sports star. Apparently, Damien liked to keep a low profile, taking classes privately and living in the executive dorms. No, the real problem was not the Diamond, but rather Derek Dayton. Monson had learned that Derek was sort of a rival with the Diamond, and just so happened to be Dean Dayton's son, not to mention an all-around jerk. The first day's encounter between Derek and Mahler in the halls of the GM was a single episode in an ongoing struggle between the two factions. Monson had no idea that such nonsense actually existed. It made him wonder what the cause of such idiocy was, and if those involved could even remember. He seriously doubted it. Now he found himself in the middle of Derek's real-life soap opera. He was not sure what he did to rub Derek the wrong way, but whatever the reason, it was unforgivable in the eyes of Derek and his followers. Monson found out very quickly that he would have to deal with threats and taunts from every direction while walking to classes, during free time, and even while eating. All of that while trying his best to navigate Corn's huge campus and student life. Twice already, Monson was the target of a one-sided, rather enthusiastic food fight, the second of which was so widespread and out of control, the lunch workers called the Dean of Discipline just to restore order in the cafeteria. What followed was both so unreasonable and outrageous that the indignation of the whole event caused him to burn with anger every time he thought of it. The moment he arrived, the Dean whisked Monson off to his office and forced him to endure 20 minutes of incoherent ranting, during which Monson was not even sure the food fight came up. When the Dean finally released him, he saw Derek standing just outside the office, with a smirk that should have been punishable by law. All Monson could do was sigh with frustration. The students' enthusiasm for harassing him quickly came to a head when the rumors started. The first and probably most problematic rumor was the one that surfaced within the first few days of the start of class. The Barty Bridge disaster was a common topic in class and in the news. The official reports were still not out yet, and people still did not really know what happened. These questions and constant reminders, coupled with the dean's disclosure at orientation, made Monson's past almost as common a topic as the weather. He arrived at this obvious conclusion from the furtive looks and whispered conversations that occurred all around him. Twice in class, he found discarded notes that related directly to him, and once when he sat down at one of the school's computers, he found that someone had Googled his name. Most people, at least at first, seemed to understand that he was one of the survivors of the disaster, and his scars were as a result of that tragedy. By the end of the week, however, the rumor was that he was suffering from some incurable, highly contagious disease, as evidenced by his appearance, and that he was in fact melting before their very eyes. The rumors just escalated to more outrageous from there. There were some people who were friendly, despite the rumors, but as the days passed, these people became fewer and fewer in number. Most of the students did not openly mistreat him, but there was a noticeable difference in their interactions. People talked to him less and less in class and in the hallways. Many people were even reluctant to look at him, or turned to walk the other way when they saw him coming. It took him a while to figure out why. The word was out. Derek and his groupies were after the Horum Vir, and those who were in the way would get the same treatment. This type of intimidation really wore on him. It dampened his spirits a great deal. The good news was that not everyone succumbed to Derek's influence. For some reason, Indigo Harrison was very friendly and took the time to talk to he, Casey, and Artorius whenever possible. Taurus Green was usually straightforward as well. He wished she would not be, as her high-profile status made him nervous. But even more than that, she just seemed to aggravate an already tough situation. People, boys mainly, did not seem to like it when he talked to her. While no one actually said this, the looks he received were enough to silently explain their point. He did not exactly know why there was such a problem. It was not like he, or anyone else for that matter, thought that he had an actual chance beyond casual friendship, but it was evident that they did not like it despite that fact. Besides the poor treatment and odd rumors, he really could not complain. He found two great friends in Artorius and Casey, both of which made huge efforts to reassure him. Brian also tried very hard to be of service in those early times of need. He gave Monson advice whenever he asked for it and brought or made him meals when he did not feel like going to the dinner hall. That was how that first week passed, wedged between friend and foe. Monson simply endured. It was all he could do. "Dude, this sucks." Casey slammed his spoon into his cereal bowl with a little more force than he had intended, causing it to splash all over. "I mean, seriously, it really sucks." It was Monday morning of the second week of school, and Monson and Casey were just finishing breakfast. "Don't worry, Case." Monson was not sure if he sounded convincing or not. "The open tryouts aren't until next week. You'll just have to take it easy until then. You should be all right. Okay, I know it sucks missing your private tryout, but why don't you let me talk to Abel for you? I might be able to work something out." "Nah, thanks, bro." Monson noticed that Casey's answer came through gritted teeth. "Oh, why not, Casey?" Ever since Casey realized he was going to miss his private tryout with Artorius, he had been completely unreasonable. "Because, bro, you already went out on a limb for me once." Casey's tone reflected a determined finality. "It was really ballsy for you to work out the deal with Abel in the first place." "True dat," chimed Artorius, joining their table. "Dude, where have you been? I haven't seen you since, early this morning." Casey shifted in his seat. "I was doing a little recon work." Artorius started to tuck into a large plate of bacon and eggs. "I wanted to know how solid a team the Legion is going to have this year." "So? What'd you find out, man?" "It's kind of involved." Casey just continued to stare. "Okay." Artorius looked around as if he were searching for eavesdroppers. "It's like this." As he went into his explanation, Monson felt his attention slip away from his friend's words and focused on Artorius' demeanor. He had a hard time pegging Artorius, like how he always talked with his hands when he was excited. It was something Monson picked up on during that first week, and was something so distinct to Artorius that Monson could read his moods at almost any given time. He felt affection and weariness surface on his emotional plane almost simultaneously as a vexing issue came back to the front of his mind. Artorius in many ways was as enigmatic as Monson was. He just could not seem to find a clear understanding of him or the way his mind worked. By now, Monson had concluded that Artorius was very different. Not in a good or bad way, just different. Like the sum of his parts were just a little bit less than his whole. It was that thing that was missing, that one thing. Once Monson came to that conclusion, he decided to look at those individual parts, and hopefully he would be led to that ever-so-elusive hole. Artorius's most noticeable attribute was the distinct feeling of strength that blossomed in and around him. However, this was too hard to categorize. Ultimately, Monson did not really know whether it was physical ability or mental agility, but he did know that Artorius personified strength, a kind that Monson had never seen before. Basic, yet pure and good. Definitely good. Artorius's physical strength was clearly a byproduct of his immense size. Monson was not a tiny boy by any means, but Artorius just towered over him. Artorius also hung out with Casey, who, by stark contrast, caused his already overgrown stature to stand out even more. In the past week, Monson did his best to get to know his two new friends, asking a myriad of questions whenever the opportunity arose. They covered the basics, friends and family, likes and dislikes, hobbies, the things that made each other tick. These conversations in and of themselves were nothing but simple and straightforward, and despite their candor, he gleaned some interesting insight from them. He concluded that Casey displayed more odd attributes than Artorius did. The whole mystic martial art thing was extremely peculiar for one. Just thinking about that boiling ball of red energy made his blood turn cold. If that was something that could be done at the drop of a hat, why was everyone not doing it? Then there was Casey's encounter with Kylie their first day of school. He handled the girl like a rag doll, showing physical strength much greater than his frame indicated. That just could not be normal. Artorius, on the other hand, was there, but never really present. Quiet for the most part, the only time he really exhibited anything truly out of character was when he was around the opposite sex. Monson was trying to figure out his girl obsession, but, like so many of his other endeavors, he was coming up short. He just could not seem to reconcile the problem, figure out that extra bit that made Artorius tick. Monson felt like he understood Casey, at least to a point, or as well as one could in such a short period of time. But Artorius was different. He remained a mystery, larger than life, but indistinct as water vapor. He found himself wondering when the opportunity for further investigation would make itself present. It seemed he did not have to wait long. The day's classes passed quickly, almost a little too quickly if truth be told. 1 minute it seemed that Monson, Artorius, and Casey were having breakfast. Then, in a blink, they were finishing gym. Not only that, there was also a noticeable lack of information retention. Monson could not really remember what he had heard that day, and frankly, he was too busy worrying about this evening to be bothered with it. He fervently hoped that his professors did not cover anything important. Artorius's private tryout was on one of the smaller fields of Corrin's eastern border. At the designated time, the three boys made their way out of the GM towards the field where they would meet Coach Abel and Coach Hawk. When they arrived, a very unpleasant surprise was waiting for them. The coaches were not the only ones there. About 24 of the Legion's players were with them. The boys stood in full gear, glaring and looking intimidating. In addition to these fully armored players, there were many others sitting on the benches and the sidelines. Monson could only assume these were also team members, though it seemed that there were quite a few people here on the field for just one football team. Well, at least they could count on Coach Hawk. "Boys, in all my years of teaching, I have never seen the solidarity and mutual understanding that I saw as you forged your way towards this meeting. I commend you on your—" "Hawk." "Yes, Coach Abel." "Shut it." "Yes, sir." "Okay, Gray." Coach Abel looked at Monson. "Let's see what your boys have got." Coach?" This was really going to suck. "What is it, Gray?" About the tryout. You see, Casey got hurt a few days ago." "Oh, yes." Coach Abel looked around at the players. "We all heard about your run-in with Cyan." With a great amount of mock concern, he continued. "I hope that she wasn't too hard on your friend." It pretty much went downhill from there. Monson had a tough time restraining Casey from jumping the one man that could single-handedly destroy any chance that he had at an athletic career at Corrin. Meanwhile, Artorius was pumping himself up, readying his mind to confront players not only 3 years his senior, but who also looked like they suffered from extended steroid use. Coach Abel turned from Monson and Casey toward Artorius. He looked him up and down, leveling a beady, analytical eye at him.
"Payne, is it? Arthur Payne?"
Artorius scowled at the sound of his given name. He did not give his usual retort, but just nodded his head.
"Well, all right, Payne. Suit up."
Coach Abel pointed towards the locker rooms on the other side of the field. Artorius left, running towards the entrance where some of the other players were now exiting. Monson and Casey waited for him tensely until he returned suited up in full football gear. He settled in with a big group of players kneeling around Coach Abel.
"Okay, ladies."
Coach Abel rubbed his hands together.
"We're going to split up into 2 teams, red shirts and gold shirts, full offense and defense. I want to see a 3-deep stack with rotations every 2 downs. This is the real deal, girls. Let me see it."
Thus, they began. Monson did not know the first thing about football, but even he could tell that Artorius' team was at a disadvantage from the start. As Casey filled in the gaps, Monson gathered that the team was doing a 4th down start from the 20. He also figured out that they were switching back and forth from offense to defense. Artorius was playing something called a middle linebacker while on defense. As you watched the game progress, Monson could see that the linebacker acted as a sort of second guard to the row of players at the line of scrimmage, which, incidentally, was an invisible line that people could not cross until the play was put into motion. The reason for this escaped Monson at the moment, but he figured it would make sense, eventually. When playing on offense, Artorius was a fullback. After one of the large players called a center hiked the ball, a guy called the quarterback stood behind a wall of massive players, all engaged in blocking the oncoming defense, and then he either passed the ball or handed it off to someone else, who then ran the ball towards the end zone. Monson eventually realized this end zone was sort of a goal for scoring points. Besides all that, it did not really seem that difficult. Monson and Casey sat on a small set of bleachers, not far from the sideline and in the exact middle of the field. They watched as the mock game played out. "Hi!" While Monson and Casey both recognized the voice, it still caught them off guard. Neither of them took their attention off the game, but heard a plop as Indigo Harrison sat down on the other side of Casey. "Hey, boys, what's up?" Casey turned toward Monson, giving him a stern look that plainly said that he did not want to deal with her right now. It looked like it was going to be up to Monson. "Indigo." He hoped he came off in a light, friendly voice. "And what do we owe the pleasure?" "Pleasure? Why, hero, what do you mean by that?" He could hear a rather devious tone in her voice. "It's an expression?" He still had not looked at her. "I'm sure it is." "Indigo?" There was a small giggle. "Yes?" "Are you going to answer my question?" "No, I don't think so." Monson leaned out in front of Casey so he could look at her, hoping to instill by look alone his annoyance. The problem was, Indigo was not looking back. "Cyan?" Now that was unexpected. Cyan sat next to Casey, with Indigo leaning out from behind her. Apparently, Casey was still oblivious to who was sitting next to him. "You remembered my name. Impressive." She looked at him with a guarded expression. How are you?" "I aim to please. I'm good. How about yourself?" He suddenly felt awkward and could not help but think back to his disgraceful display in the gym that day. It was so out of character for him trying to act cool. What an idiot. "I'm okay." She turned to Casey. "I'm sorry, I don't know your name. I didn't get the chance to ask while you were pounding the crap out of me?" Casey harumphed, his gaze locked on the field. Monson wondered when he figured out it was Cyan and not Indigo sitting next to him. "I would hardly call that pounding the crap out of you. I only hit you once and it wasn't even that hard." "Not even that hard?" Casey was outraged. He looked away from Artorius in the game for the first time.
I've been sore for like days. You didn't hit me that hard, then what'd you do? Some kind of African voodoo to make my muscles melt?
Monson burst into laughter. It was obvious, however, that neither Casey nor Cyan thought it was funny. They both looked at him.
Okay, fine. Maybe not the most appropriate time.
He glanced back and forth between them.
But come on, you have to admit, that was funny.
I thought it was funny. Indigo leaned forward, looking at Monson with smoldering eyes. Both Cyan and Casey gave her an irritated look, then turned their attention back to the game, which, from the looks of it, was not going well at all. Monson, not wanting to give Indigo any encouragement, followed suit. He watched ruefully. He initially suspected that Artorius had been at a disadvantage. His team was smaller, slower, and now noticeably less talented. The longer the game went on, however, the more obvious the difference in ability was. Artorius, along with his team, were the recipients of a good old-fashioned beating. He asked a question silently to himself.
Would Abel do that on purpose?
A whistle blew and the two sides went to their respective sidelines. Monson could tell Artorius was upset. The big guy was gesturing angrily as he talked to the older guys on his team. All of them seemed reluctant to speak to him.
There's something wrong with this picture.
Monson continued to watch the interactions between Artorius and his team.
You noticed too? Artorius' team isn't as good. That much is obvious. But there is...
Casey's voice trailed off. Monson waited for the rest of his thought. Nothing came. Instead, as Casey was looking across the short field, a very curious look crept onto his face. Suddenly he looked at Monson, then turned back again, his face noticeably more confused, as if he could not believe what was happening.
Penny for your thoughts?
Monson bent forward, looking back towards his friend, trying to catch his attention.
Dude, how cheesy are you?
Shut up.
Thought you wanted to know what I was thinking.
I changed my mind. Casey chuckled, but his gaze did not shift from the field. The game had resumed and Artorius' team was again taking a pounding. Many of his teammates were the recipients of some exceptionally hard hits. Monson was right. The other team seemed too good. Despite his teammates' performance, Artorius was impressive. He was incredibly fast for someone so large, and his hits appeared to have all the impact of a freight train. Yet, Monson still had one of those lingering feelings that something was out of place.
Hey, Casey, is there something that I'm...
An especially loud mix of noises from the surrounding crowd interrupted him. It sounded like someone was screaming his name. When he looked around, however, he saw no one.
What was that, Gray?
Casey seemed not to have noticed anything.
Were you saying something?
Yeah. Monson searched for the source of his uneasiness.
I was just asking about the match. I don't know much about football, but something about this seems off. You know what I mean?
No, not really, dude. Monson sighed.
I guess I was hoping you would be able to put into words what I was feeling.
Casey raised his eyebrow.
Oh, shut it. You know what I mean. It's not like that.
Casey's gaze switched quickly after their bout of merriment back to the game. Just then, Monson noticed something.
So that's why you're so attentive.
A cute blonde girl with her hair up in a half ponytail, surrounded by friends, chatted lightly on the far side of the field. Now, he could not be sure, but it appeared that Casey had been watching his childhood friend.
Casey, you're totally spying on Kylie.
Monson spoke in a whisper, so that Indigo and Cyan could not hear him. Not that they were paying attention anyway.
Dude, no I wasn't. I can't help that she just happens to be in my line of sight. You're totally in love. You're senile. Just admit it. Not on your life, bro.
Monson laughed again, but was unable to say more as Indigo interrupted them. Monson?
Yeah.
He shifted from the scowling Casey and focused on Indigo, who also appeared to be scowling herself.
I think someone's trying to get your attention.
She pointed up the sideline to a group of people 20 yards down towards the end zone. Confused, Monson again popped out behind Casey and looked to see a girl with strawberry blonde hair sitting among a huge group of students, all of whom were lounging lazily. The upperclassmen were engaged in a variety of activities. Some were typing on laptops while others talked secretively, wrapped together under blankets. There were 2 or 3 boys doing their best to seize the attention of the girl football groupies, but were having little success. Many, most even, were not even watching the game. He wondered why they were even there. Monson's eyes searched Taurus Green's face. She looked slightly frustrated. She looked like she was trying to get his attention. As their eyes met, she smiled. "Taurus?" Monson said aloud, though not loud enough to be heard by anyone. "Now what are you up to?" Monson smiled back at her and mouthed the word "hi," all while ignoring the huffing and puffing of Indigo, who was trying her best not to watch the exchange. Taurus giggled slightly, and then held up something in her hands. "What are you trying to show me?" "Oh, I see." It took him a moment to recognize that she was holding up her cell phone, the same cell phone she had shown him the first day of school. It also was the same cell phone that he had not bothered calling or texting. She pointed at her phone. He reluctantly pulled out his. There was a message on it. He touched the message button, feeling slightly apprehensive. On the screen was Taurus's personalized name that she had obviously added when she input her phone number. With it was a message, written out in single letters and numbers, little yellow smiley and frowny faces, and other abbreviated text. It read, "From my princess." "Hey, snobby boy," smiley face. "Why don't you talk to me anymore? You're gonna hurt a princess's feelings. That's not very nice, frowny face." Snobby boy? What's that all about? Monson thought to himself. He reread the message and made a mental note to change that "my princess" name in his phone. He touched the reply button and tried to mimic the abbreviated text using single letters and numbers. To my princess. "What are you talking about? I talk to you every time I see you. You're just too popular to notice. I understand. I guess a little duck like me gets lost in a pond this size, smiley face." He touched the send key. Seconds later, his phone beeped and flashed an envelope flying across the screen. From my princess. "Well, you know what that means, right?" He looked over at her, his signature eyebrow raised. He looked back at his phone and touched reply. To my princess. "No, I don't have a clue." Again, his phone beeped. From my princess. "It means that either you don't call me enough, or maybe we need to find a smaller pond, winking smiley face. Ha ha ha." Monson gasped out loud at this. Was she flirting with him again? He looked up at her. She was talking to a boy who was sitting behind her. She was giving this boy the same overly charming smile he had seen her use before. His face scrunched up. "You devil woman, how many men have you deceived?" he said to himself. He looked down at his phone and caught his reflection in the screen. He sighed. What was this girl thinking? He glanced up again. He chuckled as he saw who was trying to grab Taurus's attention. His fingers hit the keypad of his phone. To my princess. "Looks like you have company. Watch out, surprised smiley face." More snickering came from Monson as Taurus finally looked around her. Being wrapped up in her texting and conversations, she failed to notice Derek Dayton standing in front of her, trying to get her attention. She glanced at him as he sat down next to her. A look of polite interest splattered across her face. Monson continued to observe the two. She gave Derek a bright smile, looking interested as he sat down. Meanwhile, without even glancing down, her fingers were moving at top speed across the phone held on the opposite side of Derek. Monson reached for his beeping phone. From my princess. "Blah!" Smiley face with tongue stuck out. Monson laughed again, but realized that something about Taurus bothered him. A real smile? Does this girl even have a real smile? He thought. Well, you look like you're having fun. Monson gave a little start and yelled at himself silently. He knew, just knew that he was sitting there, grinning like an idiot. He turned reluctantly to his left to see Cyan. Weren't you just sitting over there a minute ago? Cyan's deep blue eyes continued to look, unflinching, into his. It was a bit distressing. She cocked her head sideways, nodding towards where she had previously sat. He twisted to see a group of boys sitting next to Indigo, chatting her up. While Indigo did not seem to mind at all, Casey looked like he was going to punch someone. Trying to avoid the rush, huh? Monson now understood the reason that Cyan moved. Being popular must be tough. I wouldn't know. She continued watching her sister. Indigo is much more of a people person than I am. Most people are intimidated by me. How's that relevant? I'd be willing to bet those guys wanted to talk to you just as much as they wanted to talk to her. You are the mysterious one after all. To his surprise, she actually laughed. It was not a pleasant sound, far from what a laugh should be. There was a hard, almost cruel tinge to it. The laugh set his nerves on edge, but at the same time, he felt like he knew where she was coming from. Somehow, her laugh felt familiar. She stopped laughing. Oh, so you don't believe me, huh? She shook her head and finally took her eyes off her sister. She met his gaze. Her gaze. It had a strange effect. It made him wonder to himself, was it possible to be defiant and heartbroken at the same time? To show one emotion that feels true, but to also feel an opposing emotion inside? No, nonsense. This isn't some movie. Real life isn't like that. Well, if you don't believe me, he said out loud. Honestly, he was not sure what he should say to get his point across. I suggest you look behind you. Monson knew it was a gamble, but if it paid off, it would prove his point nicely. He was confident for some reason. He just knew. Cyan twisted on the bleacher, peering over her shoulder as she saw, well, Monson wasn't sure what she saw, but apparently it had some effect on her. She appeared genuinely speechless when she turned back around. I guess you're more popular than you think. The words spilled from his mouth like water through cupped hands. He knew these words were true, and whether it was luck or something else, it did not matter. She looked towards the still raging game. Monson did a quick half-glance over his shoulder to see what caught Cyan's attention. He saw a couple of upperclassmen with bright red faces talking in hushed voices. Oddly enough, after this little exchange, and despite it being quite warm, Cyan put on her rather heavy jacket. She wrapped it around her shoulders like a shawl, then righted herself. Told ya. Must be hard to be so universally admired. You know, I should get your autograph before it's too late. You're one to talk. Cyan looked determinedly forward. I saw who you were texting, you know. Taurus Green. Aren't you the lucky guy? It was Monson's turn to go red. Deep red. He spoke and was thankful when he found that his voice did not reflect any of his embarrassment. Oh, come on, it's not even the same. Terrace is the go-between for the Hornbeer and the Student Senate. It's her job. Cyan's look became a mix of skepticism and triumph. My princess? Oh, come on, that's just unfair. I didn't put her name in there like that. She did. Sure, Romeo. Who would have thought you were so poetic? He brought his hand up swiftly. Here. She actually flinched, though it was nothing more than a blink of the eyes. He could tell she was angry with herself. That anger, however, quickly turned to confusion when Monson handed her a bottle of water. What's this? He smiled at her. Drink it. You're thirsty. Cyan took the bottle, apparently too shocked for further argument. She stared at him, the most curious of expressions forcing its way onto her face. He stared back, and found that the expression on her face was priceless. Absolutely priceless. They settled into a huffy silence, focusing their attention back onto the game. Monson chastised himself for almost forgetting about the game and Artorius. At that very moment, a stream of swear words came pouring out of Casey.
Casey! Dude, there is something wrong here.
His statement failed to explain his outburst.
You are totally right, Grey.
The crowd let out a collective moan, cutting Casey off. Something was happening, something so terrible, many of the spectators were actually hiding their eyes. Indigo and her suitors looked horrified, as did many of the others sitting around them. Whatever happened in those moments of Monson's inattentiveness, it was bad, clearly evident in the faces of those watching. Not only could he see how bad it must have been, he could feel it. The effect of whatever transpired wafted through the crowd like a heavy mist. It was almost tangible, as if the wind carried it through the spectators. Something that was not there before was there now. He could definitely feel it.
Oh no!
Monson looked to the middle of the muddy field.
Is that Artorius?
Monson peered at a mud-covered lump emerging from the bottom of what appeared to be a rather enthusiastic dog pile. From the disconnected conversations around him, he put together what exactly had happened. Apparently, Artorius was blindsided by one of the larger members of the opposite squad. The player had hit him so hard that Artorius's helmet popped off. From the varied descriptions around him, the impact was more like a WWE flying off the top rope wrestling move than an actual hit. Now paying close attention, Monson, Casey, Indigo, and even Cyan watched the football players line up on the ball.
Hut! Hut!
The quarterback swiveled his head as a receiver started jogging parallel to the line of scrimmage.
Hike!
It happened again. Monson thought he heard the wind come out of Artorius as a huge player jarred him, leveling him into the ground. Artorius' own player had completely missed the block. It was then that Monson caught a small malicious grin, and an almost unnoticeable high five exchanged between the two team captains. He suddenly realized,
they're doing that on purpose.
He looked over at Coach Abel, who had the same small, slightly devious grin on his own face.
Doing what?
Casey spoke sharply. His gaze shifted to match Monson's, both now watching Coach Abel.
They're trying to hurt Artorius.
Monson looked on in horror.
Abel is probably trying to get back at me for giving him so much flack. Dude, we have to stop this. Next time Artorius gets to the sideline, we have to try and talk to him.
They both stood up. Indigo and her groupies followed suit, apparently thinking that Monson and Casey were trying to give Artorius some sort of emotional support. Monson actually started moving towards Abel, fully intending to punch the man. The dean would probably expel him, but it would be worth it. He had gone too long without friends to allow them to take a beating like this, especially when it was his fault. Without warning, just as Monson cleared the last rows of bleachers, something scary happened. In his moment of sordid emotion, it hit him.
No, not now, not this, he spoke to himself.
It was the same feeling from that first gym class, the one that he could not fully describe, the harsh and dangerous feeling. Fear rapidly gripped him as that overpowering sensation started to take control of his better sense and judgment. He tried vainly to pull away from it, to fight, but he was scared of the feeling, scared to find out what it meant. Paralyzed, his mind would not allow him to retreat. Suddenly, he felt himself falling into the chasm of foreign emotion, faster and faster, deeper and deeper, sinking down into an unknown location. His thoughts and emotions shut down, as if a switch that controlled such things suddenly flipped off. Now, fully consumed, there was no guilt, no fear, no pity. In the place he now found himself, there was nothing. Nothing except cold, hard, dangerous power. Monson reached the sideline and started towards Coach Abel, now on the opposite side of the field, having run across during a small break in the action. Monson was moving towards him. He did not care if everyone was watching or how much power this Abel had. He did not care if he had to walk across the field in the middle of the game. This man was going to pay. He was going to pay dearly. Abruptly, just as he reached the grass, he felt a weird burning. It was as if a thin layer of fire, like water sheeting down a smooth surface, was encircling his body. He felt it on his arms, legs, and neck. Pain erupted and wrapped him in a cocoon of fiery agony. As the pain took hold of his body and consciousness, he felt the dangerous feeling drain away, almost like it was being forcibly removed. It was all terrible, but at the same time, wonderful. Terrible because of the pain he had to endure, but wonderful in the relief that it brought. He would not hurt anyone. He did not want to hurt anyone. Sounds and visions danced across his eyes. Screams of mothers and children pierced his veiled mind as mangled bodies burned and smoldered, marinating in pools of multicolored liquid. The images felt distant but distinct. There was no time to sort them out as they slipped away from his mind. Never enough time, he thought. A final surge of pain ripped the remnants of the thoughts and images from him, and his vision went dark. He started to crumple towards the ground. In his haze, he let his mind wander. Is everything dual-natured like pain was? Pain was his savior, but he was weak, so weak. 2 pairs of powerful hands caught him. He opened his eyes as his emotion returned. All of the alien feelings were gone now, sucked out of him. No, not sucked out, but cast aside, almost as if they never existed. He felt born again, refreshed, renewed. It made him wonder if the feeling was ever real in the first place. On one side of him stood Casey, breathing deeply, looking concerned, while Artorius, still covered in mud, held up his other arm. A sweet voice whispered words of comfort in his ear, giving him strength. The voice suddenly left, and all was quiet. Suddenly, sound sharply returned. Someone was speaking his name. "Grey, are you all right?" Artorius' voice was barely higher than a whisper. "Do we need to take you to the med wing?" Arthur, they're trying to hurt you. I'm so sorry." "I know, but don't worry." Monson was hearing the words, processing them. He felt. He could feel. What? How am I not supposed to worry? Artorius smiled. "Don't worry, because I won't lose." Monson stared at him. "Arthur, you big dumb oaf! You're gonna get yourself killed." The word echoed repeatedly in his mind. Killed? Monson's arm felt a reassuring pressure. He turned his head to see Casey. Casey gave him a warm smile. Monson did his best to return it. They settled him back on the bleachers where Indigo and even Cyan looked concerned. Artorius made sure that Monson was stable before returning to the sidelines. "Hey, Grey." He turned, backpedaling towards the huddle. Yeah." Artorius smiled. "Don't call me Arthur." That particular huddle seemed to last a lifetime. There was a lot of gesturing and frantic waving. It was apparent Artorius' teammates were angry, but why they were angry was the question. Finally, the players broke up and lined up on the ball. More angry muttering echoed from all around Monson, this time from some of the spectators. People seemed to complain. It became apparent that they were complaining about the tenacity of this freshman and how silly it was that the tryout was even taking place. Glaring looks came from the group as a receiver went into motion. Artorius moved from his position behind the defensive line and shuffled slightly, mirroring the direction of the receiver. Somehow, Monson could already see the result. Hut, hut, hike! Artorius burst into the line like a thundering bull, bending slightly as his hands collided with his opponent's chest. The two players stood motionless, locked for the briefest of seconds. Then, with a surge of strength that felt so tangible it was as if the very ground shook, the much larger opponent flew back several yards. He hit the mud, slid a few feet, and did not get up. A collective gasp spread like wildfire through the crowd as the events they witnessed did not match up to their own understanding. Shocked at this turn of events, the wide receiver that had come down to crack block on that side was less than a yard away from Artorius and scrambled to try and adjust his pace. Too late. Artorius caught him with a beefy arm. Smack! Artorius laid him out flat with a clothesline, the wide receiver doing one of those theatrical backflips found in martial arts movies. He grunted, the air rushing out of his lungs as he hit the ground. Unfazed, Artorius went after the quarterback, splitting two linemen who got in his way. Without pretense, Artorius wrapped up the QB and drove him solidly into the mud, absolutely crushing him. From that point on, Artorius was like a whirlwind of power, speed, and precision. He hit, tackled, and maneuvered with so much determination and force, it was borderline inhuman. He was like a machine built specifically for playing football. Again and again he overpowered, outran, and trampled over players older, stronger, and more experienced than he was. He played with such drive that despite his teammates being useless, their side gained ground. What in the world is going on, Grey? I've never seen anything like this from Artorius. Your guess is as good as mine. It's like he's a totally different person. That's the understatement of the year, bro. Casey continued to look amazed. The second half of the game was very different from the first. Artorius' team seemed inspired by their younger comrade, so much so that they too started to play for real. This was now a real football game. Fast-paced and taxing, his teammates really dove into it, and while Monson did not fully understand the rules, he did too. He felt renewed from the excitement. His strange feelings were gone, and his body felt fine now. It was as if none of it had ever happened. There was some disappointment, however, as despite the second half effort, Artorius' team lost the match. There was just too much ground to make up from the first half's fiasco. Yet, that did not seem to matter. They fought. They fought hard. Sometimes the actual score doesn't really matter. At least, it did not matter to Indigo. For Monson and Casey, this was not one of those times. They were still completely infuriated about the whole ordeal. Artorius, however, seemed to have won the respect of his potential teammates, and that was what was really important. Monson had to be honest. For him, one of the best parts of the whole experience was Coach Abel's reaction. During this almost dreamlike change in his sadistic plan, he watched as the student he intended to be his object lesson categorically destroyed his seasoned players. By the end of the game, his attitude was noticeably different. He was watching Artorius intently, looking at his movements, analyzing his moves and everything else about him. Monson could see the change in Abel's attitude. The man seemed to have a proud streak a mile long, but he recognized talent that he could mold into wins, and that was what was important to him, wins. Monson knew that regardless of how this player came to Abel's attention, or how young he was, Abel would not allow someone like Artorius to get away. Monson found it very satisfying to watch the coach walk over and talk to Artorius after the game. Finally, Artorius made his way towards the bleachers. He looked very pleased with himself.
Arthur,
said Casey and Monson in unison. They looked at each other and laughed.
Dude, that was unbelievable. I've never seen you play like that, bro.
Indigo wedged her way in front of the two. It was rather impressive. Not that I know much about football, but you really commanded the audience's attention. Artorius was looking embarrassed at the attention and compliments, especially Indigo's. Monson was willing to bet that if it were not for the mud, they would have seen him blushing brightly. Artorius left them shortly to change out of his gear. He was still very dirty. There was a bit more posing and congratulating upon his return. Then the 5 of them, Cyan included, made their way back towards the dorm where Artorius could clean up and they could all get ready for dinner. As they neared the barracks, Indigo and Cyan headed towards the girls' dormitory, and the boys lingered near the entrance. Artorius stopped, pausing to open the door for a few other people, including the boy in the wheelchair. "Artorius, I have to ask." Monson stopped speaking for a moment until everyone passed. He noticed that the boy in the wheelchair did not even look at him. It kind of hurt his feelings. He ignored this, however, and continued. "What happened to you that second half?"
"Guess I just got lucky."
Artorius walked through the still open door, following a skeptical-looking Casey and Monson.
"I'd like to say that there was an awakening. You know, just like one of your animes, Casey. Like some untapped power came to me in my time of need, but I didn't feel any different. Things just happened to go my way. I truly just got lucky."
"Well, I hope your luck continues." Monson smiled, shaking his head. "Because that was truly Wait a second. What's anime? And what do you mean, an awakening?" Casey gasped. Rather theatrically, Monson thought.
"Oh, no."
Artorius placed a hand over his eyes. He spoke in a rather resigned tone of voice.
"Now you've done it."
"Arthur, why doth thou act in such fashion? Thine dearest companion, Lord Grey, lacketh education in the world's literary mediums. To not be acquainted with the writings of something so divine and so pure as Japanese anime? Truly, we should not be numbered among his friends if we close our eyes to such an educational affront."
"Case, first of all, don't call me Arthur. Second, I don't have a problem with anime. Anime is great. I love anime. But do you really have to talk like that?"
Hold up. Before you answer that question, and yeah, Casey, the speech was a little weird, would someone just tell me what anime is? Grey. Thankfully, Monson noted Casey's return to normal speech. "Anime is my lifeline, but for you to truly understand the ins and outs of anime and its potential world..." Casey stopped talking, letting his words slur into an indistinguishable mess, all while looking distant, almost as if he was conversing with some unseen individual. Monson thought he sounded drunk, though Casey was probably just trying to be dramatic. Monson and Artorius waited until he finished his reverie. "I got it!" Casey stated this in such a way as to make someone think that he had just come up with a solution to world hunger. "I won't tell you what anime is. I'll show you what anime is." Monson did not have the heart to tell him he was not interested. Rarely had he seen Casey this excited, so how could he refuse? "Does it have to be tonight?" Monson knew he had heard in Casey's voice a proposal for an all-night exposé. "Of course it's gotta be tonight. I can't go on knowing that such depravity has occurred."
"You've lost this one, Grey."
Casey again became progressively more extravagant with his verbiage. Monson and Artorius just laughed and continued to follow Casey to the elevator.
You've been listening to the podcast-only novel of The House of Grey by Collin Earl. For more news, information, and updates, please visit houseofgreybook.com. Music by Figure of Fiends. Visit the band at myspace.com/Figure of Fiends. Cover art for The House of Grey provided by James Thane. More information at THAYN.net.